Okay, we're learning the Gemara Sanhedrin, page Kuf Tes 109a. Let's bring up the text here. 109a. Bring up the. Okay, so we're holding in now the mission that deals with people that don't have a portion in the world to come, that are now groups of people. So we discussed last week the generation of the flood and the generation of the Tower of Babel, and now we're going to discuss the people of Sodom, the story of Sodom. So the Gemara says, Anshe Sodom, the people from Sodom, Ein lahem chelek la'olam haba, do not have a portion in the world to come. Tanur Rabbanan, the rabbis have learned. Hey, Aaron. Tanur Rabbanan, the rabbis have learned. Anshe Sodom ein lahem chelek la'olam haba, the people from Sodom do not have a portion in the world to come. Shenemar, what's the supporting verse? So it says, because it says that V'anshe Sodom ra'im, the people of Sodom were evil, or wicked, V'chatoim l'Hashem me'od, and they sinned to God tremendously. So the two descriptions of the people of Sodom's wrongdoing, that they were ra'im, wicked, and sinners. Ra'im ba'olam hazeh, they were wicked in this world. V'chatoim, and they continued, so to say, their sin continued to last, even the olam haba, in the world to come. Omar Rav Yehuda. So Rav Yehuda says like this. Royim, he learns the verse backwards, or different. Royim begufon, that it's not just a description of this world or the world to come, but also a description of their types of sins that they did. Say Royim begufon, they were sinful or wicked with sins committed with their body, meaning in relationships. V'chatoim, and they were sinful with memoinam, with their money, means in money issues, and so they both gave into all types of inappropriate behavior, plus also sinful with their money. Roim begufon, how do we know that they were sinful with their body? Because we find the word ra'ah, which is wicked, connected to relationships. Like it says, Ve'eich esa ha'ara ha'gdoil ha'zois v'chatasi l'elokim. Yosef, when he's being enticed by the wife of Potiphar, Eshes Potiphar, when Yosef is in Egypt and he's a servant by Potiphar, and his wife comes and tries to get Yosef to sin with her, so he says, so Yosef tells her, how can I do this wicked act? And sin to my God. So from here we see that Ra'ah is talking about relationships, sexual inappropriate behavior. V'chatoim b'memoinim, how do we know that they were sinful with their money? Because it says, V'hoi b'cha chet. So it's that you will have a sin. It's talking about a person who doesn't give charity. So we see money connected to sin. La Hashem, and it says that the people were in Sodom, were ro'oim, the verse goes, they were, we said before, Roim v'chatoim la'Hashem mi'oi, to God. So what does it mean to God? Zubirkas Hashem, they would curse God, which is, it says blessing God as a softer language to indicate they would cursing God. Ma'oid, and what does it mean? Very much miskavnim v'chaitim, that they did it intentionally. From the word kavana, they had intentions to sin, so it wasn't sinning by mistake. Rashi says that droim begufam shtufim zima, they were just full of different sexual behaviors. Like it says in the pasuk, he quotes that how do we know that money is connected to the word chet, sin? So Rashi says, because it says, Hishamar lecha pen davar im levavcha blial, you would have this blial, this, so to say, evil idea of not giving tzedakah, not giving charity, and the verse continues, V'hai b'cha chet, you will have a sin, and this is mama, and this is money issues. So we see clearly that there's a connection between the word chet and money. So therefore we see that the people of Sodom were sinful with their money and their body. Rashi says, what does it mean that they were hold on a second. And if Shuki was trying to get in before, I'm not sure why he couldn't get in. Oh, here we go. Let's try to get him in again. So it says, oh, hey, Shuki, so I was just about to text you. I saw you trying to get in before. So Rashi said, and he brings down that Rashi in Chumash says, or again, page 109a. So Rashi in Chumash says that the people in Sodom were very sinful. Hashem me'oid, that yoidim es riboinam, they knew about God. It wasn't like they were lacking knowledge of behavior. Umiskavenim limroid boy, and intentionally they wanted to rebel. It means they were doing things. We're going to learn about Sodom. Sodom is a very complicated Talmud. I mean, the way that people just understand Sodom to just be hateful, evil people, that's letting them off lightly. They were systematically in an organized fashion corrupt. They had courts, they had laws, they had what do they call it? They had the word slips my mind. So they had rules, they had a system, and the system itself was corrupt. And that's why it's something that we have to pay attention to. A lot of times people say this, well, this is the rule, this is the way it is. Who says, we have in Perek Avos says that a person who says, what's mine is mine, and what's yours is yours. So in Perek Avos, one opinion says, okay, that's a Beinoni. That's a person who says, mine is mine, is yours and yours. Another opinion in the Perek Avos that we read in the Mishnah says that's the behavior of the people of Sodom. That's a Sodom behavior. So seemingly, what's wrong? What is that person what is his or hers is hers. What's mine is mine. Why is that Sodom? Because that's Sodom. Sodom camouflaged their evil behavior in laws, or what they projected or tried, the narrative that they were trying to create. This is right, this is wrong, and that was where the real evil was. And when God destroyed the city, is because he didn't subscribe to all that. What I meant to say is they had a constitution. Their constitution was corrupt laws, and corrupt laws in a way that were camouflaged as being lawful and being honest, right? What's mine is mine, what's yours is yours. And the Mishnah says that's the behavior of people of Sodom. So the Mishnah continues. V'masnisa Tani, we learned in the Brayta like this. Ra'im, that it says that they were bad. So before we learned, Ra'im is talking about their body, that there's in their sexual behavior they sin, and Chataim was with their money. But the Brayta switches it around. Says Ra'im, they were evil, wicked with their money, b'memainam, v'chatayim, and they were sinful with their goof, with their body. Ra'im b'memainam, what does it mean that they were evil with their, or wicked with their money? Like it says, v'ra'ei necha b'achicha evyon, you're going to see your and your eyes is wicked against your poor brother, right? So v'ra necha, your eyes see your brother that's poor, v'ra, and you're bad, you're evil to that person. So we see that what's that talking about? A poor person that you don't want to give to, right? You don't want to give to that person. So we see this, the word ra is connected to money. V'chatayim gufim, how do we know that they were sinful with their bodies? No one's arguing. It means we had the beginning, the opening statement of the Talmud was that Ra v'chatay means this world and the next world. So that supports the idea that they don't have a portion of the world to come. But then the Mishnah continues. In these verses, we continue to try to understand what was their sin. So the first opinion was that Ra'ah, wicked, was with their body and sinful with their money. The Brisa says the opposite, that they were wicked with their money and sinful with their body. It's not a play in words. It's a different understanding of what's the sin. Wicked is different than sinful. Wicked sinful is not necessarily a character trait. A person who's sinful could be weak. You sin. God told you not to do something, you sin. Wicked is a statement about the person's character. So the first opinion is they were wicked in their behavior, in their sexual behavior. And they were sinful, let's say you could say a person who's not bad, but just can't part with their money. They're cheap. They don't want to give charity. They don't want to help someone else. Not because they're evil people. They can't get rid of them. They can't help someone else out because they're too cheap to give. So that would be chatoim. And the other opinion says no. They were literally wicked with their money, evil. They were conniving with their money, and they were weak with their bodies. Chatoim, they were sinful with their bodies. So that's a different view of what their problems were. How do we know that they were? So it says we see the word ra, wicked, when a person doesn't want to give charity. It says v'roi necha b'achicha avyon. V'chatoim begufin, they were sinful with their body, like it says, v'chatasi lelukim. The same verse that we quoted before, that Joseph said to Potiphar's wife, we quoted on top over here, that Joseph tells Potiphar's wife, how could I do this evil act, this wicked act? I'll be sinful to my God. So the emphasis is on the sin, not so much on the weak in this. In when it comes to inappropriate behavior, when it comes to bodily behavior, i.e., sexual relationships. So this opinion says, what does it mean to God? Again, they would curse God. Ma'oid, so the first opinion was ma'oid means that they knew God and miskavnin limreis by. They intentionally wanted to rebel against God. Here he says ma'oid is shvichas damim. They were murderers. They spilled blood easily. How do we know that the word ma'oid is an indication that of spilling blood? Because we have another verse. We have a verse when we learned about many weeks ago about King Menashe of Yehuda, that it says about King Menashe of Yehuda, we learned about him that he's also on the list of people who don't have a portion in the world to come. It says V'gam dam naki shafach Menashe b'Yerushalayim harbe me'od. So we have the word me'od when it comes to murder. It says that gam dam naki, innocent blood, Menashe spilled in the streets of Jerusalem very much. So we have the word ma'od, which is very much, and that's an indication that the word ma'od is alluding that there was murder. So the first opinion is that ra'ah means sexual behavior, chata'i means money, and la Hashem is cursing, and ma'od is intentionally rebelling against God. And the Mishnah says that the wickedness was in their money. Their sinfulness was in their bodies, in their relationship behaviors that was inappropriate or wrong. And Hashem is also cursing God, and Ma'od is murder. Again, the disagreement is not just how we understand the verses, but also what was behind their sin, because we're going to learn now that people of Sodom were corrupt in a systematic way. Like I said, the constitution was corrupt. And something that we have to pay attention to, even in today's times, when a person opens the book and says, "Well, this is the law." Of course, that's the law. Dina de machus dina. But we have to ask ourselves, what's the drive? What's behind a lot of the behaviors that we have? Where's it coming from? Is it coming from an honest place, right? Like the mission says, "What's mine is mine, and what's yours is yours." Some people say that's the behavior of the people of Sodom. Okay, Tanu Rabban and our rabbis have learned. It says like this. Anshe Sodom, the people of Sodom, lo nisko, their behavior of, so to say, of excessive haughtiness comes from bishvil toiva sheshpiya lahem hakadosh baruch hu, because of the tremendous blessings God gave them. God gave them tremendous blessings, and instead of being humbled by it, they turned it around to close themselves off from the rest of the world. Again, a lot of people will take a blessing and distance themselves from others and cut themselves off from having a relationship or interacting with others, as opposed to using that blessing and acknowledging it to be helpful and giving to others. Right? The story of the Baal Shem Tov, who says, what's the difference between a mirror and a window? Is the mirror has, the window has silver. You give a little money and all you see is yourself. You can't you can't see outside. You can't see what's going on in the other person, someone else's life. So what does it say? Where do we see that they had tremendous blessings? So he says, because there's a verse says that Eretz mimena yetze lechem v'tachteh nefach k'mayeish. So first it says they had a land that gave bread. So the place of Sodom today, we know Sodom is what's the Dead Sea. So we're talking about the area between Jericho and towards Ein Gedi, or all the way down towards Ein Bokek. So that's that southern eastern part of Eretz Yisrael. So that's where the Sodom is, or more in the south of that. So it says there was a land that once it was a lush land that gave off bread, so they had food, they had a blessing of food. And God flipped it over like fire. It says Mekoim, a place of sapphire, of like sapphires, of ne'ava afrei sahavloi. They had earth that had gold, so they had money and food. And Nasiv, and nevertheless it says that it was that path. Nasiv is like a path. Lo yadu oyit v'lo shezafatu ayin aya. It says the path no bird of prey knows, neither has the falcon's eye seen it, indicating they wouldn't allow any predators, or how they looked at people. They viewed people as predators to come take what their blessing. Instead of being giving, they protected what's theirs. It says that neither the proud beasts have not trodden it, nor has the lions passed thereby. This is a reference to the city of Sodom, which has later overturned, as it stated thereafter. He puts forth his hand upon the flinty rock, and he turns it over. But that's the top part. But the other part was that they didn't allow others to take any joy in it. The Mefarshim say an amazing thing. Before we say Rashi, that most people, most countries are blessed with one of the two. Some have natural resources of diamonds and gold, but they have no water, they have no food. And others have a lush amount of food, right? They called Ukraine the breadbasket of Europe, but they may not have any other natural resources to support themselves. So they're required to have industry, and they're required to have trade. So they trade their food for money, or those who have money trade their money for food. But the people of Sodom had both money, they had gold and precious stones, and they had lechem and they had food. So they said, we don't need trade. We're self-sufficient, right? No, we don't want to have any interactions with anyone else. It's a lot of what's being said today, anti-global people that are trying to say that it should be, we should just be ourselves. We shouldn't have any trade with anyone else. Well, you need trade. That's part of the trade. Is not just because you need to come on to other people, but trade is a way of interacting with other nations, to interact with each other, to learn to live with each other. So they didn't want to. They said, we have everything we need. We don't need anyone. So we don't want to have any trade with anyone. So that's it. It says there's a pasuk. He says, the commentaries say, Ki yesh eretz pruya. You have lands that have a lot of wheat, and you have lands that have a lot of gold. So therefore, like I said before, the Mashra quotes this. So therefore, you have to have trade. But the people of Sodom, because they were rich both in food and money, they said they don't want any pass. They don't no one come by it. Closing all immigration. No one's allowed into the country. The Gemara continues. Let's just learn Rashi. Eretz mimena yoytzi lechem eretz saviv v'toivehi. They had a land that was lush with growth of physical foods and breads and grains and fruits and vegetables. Then it was turned over and became the Dead Sea. Right? What's the Dead Sea? By definition, there's no live official. I mean, obviously there's some sort of life there, but no real life. There's no fish that live there, etc. Or very few. The people of Sodom said, if we have a land that has a lot of bread and has gold, why do we need people coming in? We don't want any immigration. No one should come here. Take the outside highway that goes west. We don't want anyone coming into our country or into our area. So why does anyone come here? People only come here to take from us. Sounds a little familiar, right? People want to take from us as opposed to, we don't need anyone. So don't come. You're not welcome. We should forget that no one should be able to come into our land. Like it says, Paretz nachal mi'ir gar hanishkachim mini regel dalum enishno. He quotes a verse in Job. He breaks open a watercourse in a place far from inhabitants, forgotten by pedestrians. They are dried up. They have moved away from man. I mean, to say that there was no welcoming institutions or things that welcome people to come into Sodom. So Rashi quotes. It says, here's his parts nachal that he quotes that this was a punishment from God. That let's first see it in Rashi. He says, because we have a lot of bread. Why do we need passerbys? Why do we need people to come to our country? We don't need anything from anyone. When people are welcoming, so you have two types of people that are welcoming. Someone who has an agenda. You want something from the people that are coming, right? Tourism usually is a blessing to a country. By tourists coming, they spend money, and that's good for the country. But Sodom says we don't want tourists, right? There's a lot of people that are anti-tourism, right? Tourists ruin the spirit of our little community. So they say that we don't need tourists. We have everything we need, so tourists are only coming to distract us. We don't want any tourist, any Business people, tourists, people are going to come to us and take from us. If people are more coming to take than coming to give, and therefore we'd rather no one showed. So therefore, again, what did God do to this kind of behavior? Right? That's the same mission. The mission says, what were they saying technically? If someone's in a breakdown, we're going to see very much, it's dumb, it's a very complicated, we don't find in history, with all countries that happen, not because God is lacking the ability or what have you. We don't find anyone in history, a public statement, could be God obviously deals with every country in his own way, but we don't find like a public story, like the story of Sodom, where God totally destroyed an entire society for their behavior separate from we're not talking about the flood, but just literally that certain people's behavior, God said they no longer could be part of society. He flipped the whole country. He flipped the whole kikar, and he didn't want them to be part of society. So he's saying, what was their sin? So if you look into their sin, right, like the Mishnah says, what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours. What did they say so far? So far they said, we just don't want tourists. But we see that there's that you have a certain, that's what I'm saying before, chatoim, when you say something sinful doesn't always mean it's a bad character trait. The character trait that's negative could be weak, could be you can't, but it's not premeditated evil. Ra means it means you're intentionally being evil. You don't have to be. You're choosing to be evil. And therefore, some people say that, how did they do it? In what way were they choosing to be evil? Well, others were saying behavior in sexual behavior. The others were saying their money. So here also we see, what were they saying? They weren't saying, they could say, what do we want? We don't want tourists. What do you want from us? And what does God do? God sees that. It says, he brought fire on them and destroyed them, right? So the flood was destroyed with water. Sodom was destroyed with fire. Mi'am gar mikoime halichasit shayohilich l'mayla v'shlichu aleim hanishkachim mani regal v'nodu mi'odu mi'artza v'nodu l'daran. God, the place that God saw that they don't want people to come into their country. They want immigration, they want tourists. That's the place God said, no one's going to walk there anymore. You don't want people to walk there. If you want your place to be a place that doesn't have others, that you're not welcoming to other societies, then no one has the right to walk there, including you. So the Rava continues. Darash Rava says, it doesn't get easier to understand Sodom. So he says, Darash Rava studies like this. What does it mean about Sodom? It says, Ad ona d'haisasu al ish tiratzchu, kulcham kikir nati goder hadechuyoi. So what is this? This is a verse in Tehillim. It says, how long will you seek to overwhelm a man? You will be murdered like a leaning wall or tottering fence. What does this come to teach us? And this is referring to the people of Sodom. So what does it say? It says like this. Melamed, it comes to teach us, when he saw someone who had money, right? So right away we're going to see that officially how they project themselves are honest, or we have what's ours and we want to preserve it. We don't want any guests. But then we start to see that where's that come from? It's not coming from we just want to preserve what's ours, or people coming to take advantage of us. But they were really evil people. So when they saw other people with money, right? They had money, but they didn't want anyone to have their money, but they were jealous of anyone else's money. So if they saw people with money, they put them next to a insecure wall, means that they would endanger them. And then they would push the wall on them. It doesn't have to be literally, but the concept is the idea. And they would take their money. Means they would steal. They would set up circumstances for a person to fall and take away all their money. So they didn't want to share. They were very protective of their own money, but they were really jealous of other people's money. So they only projected what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours. But they created laws that allowed for them to take what's yours to be mine. They caused accidents to happen. They'd push people under the shaking wall and take what they wanted. Here, the Mefarshim, the Ben Yehoidia, the Ben Yehoidia says that this wasn't behavior that he behaved against people that lived in Sodom. that this is only by ger va'oirach, only by non-citizens, means people that lived there but they were non-citizens, or guests that had no one to inherit them. So because they had no one to inherit them, they made a law that whoever dies and there's no immediate person to inherit them, all the money goes to the state. State tax, 100% state tax. So again, it wasn't that he stole from them, by gunpoint. In their constitution, it says if someone dies and there's no one here, and because anyone they saw that would come here, and they weren't welcoming to guests. But if guests did show up, we know clearly guests did show up. So when guests would show up and they saw they had money, they would set circumstances for them to die. And then the Constitution says that the state tax for someone who has no immediate someone to inherit them goes to the state, goes to stone. Darash Rava continued. You have to remember something else. Rava himself came from a place of people he came from Mechuzah. The people of Mechuzah were, I'm not going to say they were people from stone, but they definitely had some issues in their behavior. That's maybe why Rav is the one who's giving the drashas about the behavior of the people of stone. Darish Rava teaches. What does it mean when it says in Job, Chasar b'choshech batim yaimam chitmu lamay la yadu or, that in the dark they dig through houses, by day they shut themselves up, they know not the light. What does this mean? Melamed shayinoisnu my name balimam, and again they would eye, so to say, a person that had money and wanted to take that money. They would give them, so to say, a gift, let's say, of a farsimon, which has a strong smell, fragrance, which is blossom, a strong blossom. Reb Steinsaltz is going to show from the ones in the Middle East, where it's a very powerful smell. So they basically would give it to them, and then they were able to smell where they were, and then they would dig tunnels and rob them. And the people, maybe it was an expensive kind of perfume, and they would put it in their safety deposit box, let's say. And they would come at night and sniff out like a dog would sniff, they would sniff out the parsimon, the blossom, to know where they hid the blossoms, and they would assume the money was nearby. Like it says, like it says, they return at the evening, they howl like a dog and go around about the city. And they would go and they would dig there and take the money. So they would give a fish. So they had all these kind of contradictory behaviors. They weren't welcoming, but then when they saw someone with money, they had these laws that basically allowed for them to immediately inherit state taxes from people. And if they saw someone with money, they would gift them with something that just was a way for them to lead them on to then later rob from them. Again, not everything has to be taken exactly 100% literally, but the idea is basically we're seeing a pattern in their behavior. Again, the Beni Haidia says, the Beni Shchai says that, again, these people, the gift wasn't to people in the city, but to people that would come into the city, or the people that weren't citizens. Again, we see from here, it's an amazing thing. We see from here, again, we don't find God's reaction to behaviors so publicly like the stone. And we're seeing that it was a system of corrupt, and a system of corrupt that even to today, people could say, well, these are our laws, and they could try to justify it as if it's right. But God's no, you could fool everyone, you're not going to fool God. So it says, they would hide, basically try to dig these tunnels. They would give this blossom to the people that had money. For some reason, they assumed that they would put the blossoms near their money, in their safes. And then they would sniff out the blossoms, and they would break in there. And they would take all the treasures that the person had. So here Reb Steinsaltz shows us here, if you look at the picture, the Arabian blossom tree, which is, I guess, a unique blossom tree. It says, according to many scholars, the tzori that is mentioned in the Torah, the tzori, right, that's one of the fragrances in the Torahs, is identified as a blossom, particularly by the Arabian blossom tree, Kampura ablossomum, which reaches 3 to 5 meters high. That's how high the tree is. The tree has extremely thin branches, complex leaves, and the small white flowers. The highest quality balsamic perfume is sap that drips in small amounts from the ends of the stems, but the perfume is generally extracted by boiling the branches. After a certain period of time, the blossom sap evaporates, leaving a sticky residue. This residue is used for medical purposes. In addition, it was used as an incense as a fragrance oil during the Second Temple period. The finest blossom grew in Jordan Valley, which is the Jordan Valley is above Sodom. Sodom is south of the Jordan Valley. It was so highly valued that it was literally worth its weight in gold. I guess what Rabbi Steinsaltz is telling us is it was a good gift, you know. So because it was worth its weight in gold, people would put it in their safe, and because they would put it in their safe, they would right. It was like the block the what are those flowers called, the tulip craze. Okay, the pasuk continues. Okay, it says Darsh. It says like this: Aram yalami bli levush ve'ein ksus bakara. It says they lie at night naked, without clothing, and they have no covering in the cold. What does this mean? Also, it says Chamar yisayim yinhagu yachbelu shar almana. They drive away the donkey of the fatherless. They take the widow's ox as a pledge. Gvulos yasigu eider gozlu yaru. They trespass. They violently steal flocks and graze them. V'yehu likvaros yuval valgadish yishkoid. For it is brought to the grave and which is kept in his tomb. The lot in the Farshim, the Marsha says. I mean, this is just behaviors that are alluding to unfair behaviors of taking the donkey of the orphan, or the ox of the widow, or stealing the. But the Marsha says it doesn't seem like there's any explanation to these verses. Also, the people, the Marsha says usually this is a tribute toward the generation of the flood. So he says the Marsha explains, doesn't tell us what, the Marsha explains how these pasuk allude to the specific behaviors of the people of Sodom. Okay, let's continue. The Gemara continues. Darsh Rabbi Yossi b'Tzipori. Rabbi Yossi of Tzipori, again, Rabbi Yossi of Tzipori was a story that's taught about when Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yossi. So the three Talmudic scholars that discussed Rome. So Rabbi Shimon, that they were talking about Rome. So Rabbi Yossi was exiled to Tzipori. He lived in Tzipori. Tzipori is west of Tiberia. It's in the hills above the Kinneret in the Galil. So Rabbi Yossi lived in Tzipori. He was sent to Tzipori by the Romans because he didn't speak positive about the Romans. So he was in Tzipori. Some people say he was from Tzipori originally, but they kept him in Tzipori. So he quotes the pasuk. It says, "Ichartrin hahi laila, telas meya machtarta b'tzipori." Says the night. So Rabbi Yossi taught in Tzipori the method of theft employed by Sodom. He showed all these stories with the parsima and all the things that he did with the blossom. And it says that night when he told us the teaching of what the people of Sodom did. So what was the consequences of his teaching? That night, 300 tunnels were excavated in Tzipori. It means people said, "Oh, wow, that's a good way to rob." Also, become a tsarin led. So the people abused him, harassed him. Why did he teach what the people of Sodom did? Because people just took instead of taking lessons of not to behave, they actually implemented these behaviors in the city of Tzipori. They said to him, "You have given away for the thieves. Why did you teach him how to behave like Sodom?" So Rabbi Yossi says, that I know that the thieves would find out, or some people say that I know that I was giving a shear. He was giving a shear in the base medrash. And what happened? All of a sudden, there's 300 tunnels in Tzipori, people digging under people's homes, giving out gifts and blossoms. So he said, I didn't know that my crowd were thieves. And when he died, Rabbi Yossi passed away. Rabbi Yossi Shafi Marzeve de Tzipori Damai. So some people say that they didn't, because they were upset at him for introducing ideas. He didn't mean it. He didn't mean bad. He meant just to teach a study. But because they learned from the study negative, people were negative, they didn't want to give him a proper burial. So the gutters of Tzipori overflowed with blood as a sign that they should treat Rabbi Yossi with respect. So let's see what Rashi says. Rashi says, again, like the Ben Ish Chai says, he thought he had a God-fearing, congregation. And so he thought he's giving a nice share in the aggadah, in the medrash of the story of Sodom. And the outcome was they were digging tunnels. So Darash Rabbi Yossi be Medrashi Chasar b'Choshech Batim. He taught in his base medrash about the people that were digging holes in Sodom. So Ichteru Tlas Mechtarta. What happened? The people of Tzipori, Aidei Recha Farsiman, they dug 300 tunnels because they also gave up blossoms. Again, it was very valuable, like its weight in gold, like Rabbi Steinzalt says, and therefore they gave gifts to people, and then they went and dug tunnels to find out where there were safes are. Rabbi Yossi says, "Mi have you done in the Asi Ganve? Mi have you done in the Ganve Asan? Did I know that thieves would come, where that thieves were in the shear?" It says Shafi Marzve the Tzipori Damad. So when he died, the gutters of Tzipori overflowed with blood. Why? The Gadol Adam have it, because Rabbi Yossi was a great person. Hasam have naked nami hay milsa the chinach nafshe lashmin in the mitzipari have. So why did he tell us that he died from that there was overflow of blood? Because to indicate that he was to show us that he did live in Tzipori, because we talked about him from Tzipori, but others say because it was connected to the way they behaved to him, they didn't treat him nicely. So therefore, they were punished, or God showed them that they have to respect Rabbi Yossi. So let's see what Reb Steinzat says. The gutters of Tzipori overflowed with blood. Some explain that this story underscores the prominence and righteousness of Rabbi Yossi, so that the people who would later live in Tzipori would not find fault in Rabbi Yossi's statement, even though he caused their predecessors to suffer loss because he introduced the behavior of Sodom, and people copycat that, and therefore the people are upset at him. There is a variant reading: when Rabbi Yossi died, they did not engage in his burial in an appropriate manner. 300 drops of blood fell from the heavens, and the gutters of Tzipori overflowed with blood. This miraculous event occurred in order to spur the residents of Tzipori to overlook their hard feelings and bury Rabbi Yossi with the respect that he deserved. Okay. Now we're continuing with the behaviors of the people of Sodom. Amro, they had in their constitution, again, it wasn't, you have societies that there's, they say there's no rule, there's no law. It's the Wild West. What's the Wild West? There's no rules of law. But here, Sodom had a lot of rules. They had a king, they had good judges, they had a constitution. And the way they saw fit to behave was based on being unfriendly, unwelcoming, selfish, egotistic, jealous, and that was the basis of their society. So Amri, they said, the Islechad Torah Marechad Yoma. So this is one of their backwards laws. Someone who had one ox, so he has to be, so to say, the city shepherd for one day. Although he only has one ox, so he's for one day. And if someone has no oxen, so theoretically the person would say, it's not my line of business. No, the rule was if you had no oxen, then you had to be a shepherd, or you had to watch the oxen for 2 days. So Hahu Yasma bar Armalata, so it says there was a orphan who was the son of a widow. I'm not sure what that means. Most orphans are, I guess that is, he was an orphan from his father, not from his mother. Havale Turimire, they made him. He had to watch the herd. And Ozal Shekalinu Ukatlinu. So he took them and he killed them. He killed all the oxen of the city, or whatever, of what they gave him. Before we continue in the middle of the story, again, let's just do the Rashi, then we're going to do some commentaries. It says, this was the custom of Sodom. Means that was in their rule of laws. If you had one ox, so you had to do, I guess, 1 day a year, that you had to be the shepherd of all the flock of the city. If you had no flock, Megalgalav Leroy Spacem, then you had to be a shepherd twice, 2 days a year. Amalahu Yisami Lamari the Tura Idis Lechat Torah. Okay, that's a continuation to next page. Before we go to the next page, I just want to read. What was their thinking? Why would someone who has no oxen have to be a shepherd at all? It's not his line of business or her line of business. So the Yad Ramah says that their twisted thinking was, if you have no oxen, so then you're not overly whelmed. You're not overwhelmed. You're not overly busy. You don't, if someone who has oxen, so you can't expect him. If I'm dealing with my own problems, you want me to be dealing with others. So I only have to do 1 day a year. But if you have no oxen, so you should have free time. So if you have free time, why would you not be a shepherd 2 times a year? So that's assuming that that could be. Someone could say, well, maybe that makes sense. So the Yad Ramah continues. That's a backwards. Chamas really means that's a corrupt idea. The Adrab, on the contrary, that if you already have, and you anyways have to take care of your animals, you might as well take care of others as well. So you could set up a situation where people help each other, but those who have in the same line of business, those who have oxes. Because you're not taking away from your job. That is your job. Is to deal with your shepherd, your farmer. Is a person who has no animals. So that person, he or she has another job. They're an accountant, they're a lawyer, they're a tech person. So they have no, why are you asking them to be a shepherd at all? Now you're causing me a loss because instead of doing my real job, my real occupation, now you ask me to do something that has nothing to do with my occupation. The Mashal says, the Mashal teaches us that seemingly what they want, they always wanted to show themselves, project themselves as having reasons and make sense. But fundamentally, again, everything about them was corrupt. And because everything about them was corrupt, you have to find and really find the corruption, because there was no good intentions in anything that they did. So he said, again, we're continuing the story. So he killed all the oxes. They gave this orphan from his mother. He had a mother that was from his father. He had a mother that was a widow. He had no oxen. They gave him to watch the oxen. So he killed everything. So he murdered all the oxen. So it says then he made a statement. This orphan said, "Islay Torah nishkol chad mashka." One who has a hide, let him take one hide, because you had one hide, take one hide. The less Torah, one who does not have an ox, nishkol trei mashka, should take 2 hides. That's what he said, because now they have all dead animals. The dead animals? People get to take the waste of the dead animals. At least we could take the hides. So they said, my hide, what kind of law is this? Why should someone who has no oxen take 2 hides? The end of the story has to be like the beginning of the story. The end of the judgment has to be like the beginning of the judgment. Just like in the beginning, the Islay Torah, one who has an ox, only is a shepherd, only watchful of the animals 1 day a year. The Leslay Torah, a person who doesn't have any oxen, has to be 2 days, Trey Yoma. So too, if the animals die, the Islay Chad Torah takes Lishkal Chad, he only takes 1 hide. The Leslay Torah, Lishkal Torah, take 2. So what do we see from here? We see from here basically that the corruption doesn't stop. It's a vicious circle. Once you have corrupt laws, so the orphan says, if that's the case, if I'm watching 2 days a year because I don't have oxen, then if there's a surplus or there's leftovers, everyone has to take something. I'll take 2 ox, two hides. Okay. The people of Sodom, the Aver b'Ma'abara Neisif Chadzuzeh. They had another set of rules. What was the set of rules? Again, everything had a reason, but fundamentally it was based on bad behavior, nasty people. That's why one of the opinions was that the Ra'ah, we're trying to figure out was there evil in their money, or is there evil in their behavior in relationships? Because was there money because they were obsessed or they were scared, really? Or just they were actually intentionally looking to be corrupt with these camouflaging it and these laws that seemingly made sense. So they said they had a law like this, that the over. I'm not sure how this worked technically, but let's just continue. The over b'mabar, a person who took a ferry. And what I mean technically is that today, it could be those days were different. Today, I'm not sure where you would take a ferry from First Dome, unless you were coming from the Kinneret, or there was bodies of water that surrounded the city that's no longer there. The only body of water we have today is the Dead Sea. Or maybe that when God flipped over the Sodom, the waters that were there became the Dead Sea. So there was water there, and then people would travel to the city by these ferries. So the Avram Mabara, someone who came by ferry, Nesif Chadzuz had to pay one zuz, which is an amount of money to travel to come to the city by ferry. Delay Avram Mabara, Nesif Trey. And if a person didn't go by ferry, either walked through the water or went around the way, there's two opinions. So then that person had to pay double the amount of money to enter the city. The Havle Torah Dara, so he says you pay two dinners. In addition, he says the Havle Torah Dara Delivni Asikol Chad V'Chad V'Shakol Chad. He said like this. In addition, when there was anyone who had a row of bricks, so someone was setting up bricks. So he would have the Havale Torah Dara the Livne's bricks. So a person who's setting up bricks. Asi Kol Chad, each person in the city would come. B'Shakol Chad would just take one brick. Well, you're cheap. You don't want to give me one brick. Amalei no Chada the Shakli. I only took one. Davashadi Tume Oy Shamke. And if a person had garlic, was drying out garlic or onions, Asa Kol Chad V'Chad V'Shakol Chad. Everyone would take one. Amalei no Chada the Shakli. I only took one. Why getting so worked up? Again, it was all these small things camouflaged in like, what's your big deal? What's the big deal? Like, and you're certainly not particular about one inconsequential brick. So why are you getting so worked up? Or one small onion, it makes what's a big deal? But everyone took one. And everyone took one, right? He had nothing left, or she had nothing left. Again, there was all these small, just nasty, unpleasant behaviors that they had between each other and with other people. Some people say, what was this idea about the taking the ferry? The ferry is usually more expensive. If a person comes by foot around through the water, so it doesn't need the ferry. Or if a person comes around another way, avoiding the need of a ferry, right? You could travel in Seattle, you could take the ferry, you could go all the way around. So if you don't take the ferry, you had to pay double the amount. What was the thinking behind it? That they claimed that if you're walking in the water, the Yad Ramah says, so you're draining the water, right? So if you're draining the water, so we're punishing you, you have to pay two times. Let's see what Rashi says. The Avar b'mabara, a person who came by ferry, shehamabura is shelahem meimav ozin v'hayu dinin kach. So they had, hold on a second. It says over here, didn't bring up. It says, it was saying over there, some reason that because their waters were azim, were strong or powerful waters, this was their rule. It doesn't explain why, but basically they wanted people to use the ferry system. If you didn't use the ferry, you used another method, so you had to pay two zuz. So someone who had a dara delivni, someone who had a row of bricks, someone was trying to build a house or whatever, something with their bricks and their mortar. So they would come and everyone would just take a small amount. But if everyone takes a small amount, there's nothing left. If a person spread out, to dry out shumim or bitzalim, garlic or onions, liyafshan kol echad echad, so everyone would take one. One of them Farshim says, what do you mean they would take one? They would take less than a proof. Riyad Ramah says they would take less than a shava pruta. Halachically, a shava pruta, amount of a pruta, anything less than that is insignificant. But if everyone takes an insignificant amount, there's nothing left. The person who is being taken from, that means the person who is being robbed, what did I already take from you? I only took one piece of garlic. But nimsa kerach mikan and mikan, and the person kept on people taking from everywhere, there's nothing left. Again, what are we seeing from here? Just again, this kind of attitude. Let's go further. Amar Arba Dayani Hayibistam. There were four judges in stone. Their names were how they behaved. One was called Shakrai, which means a straight out liar. The other one was called Shakrurai, which means a habitual liar. One was called Zaifai, which means a forger. The other one was called Umatzledina, a perverter of justice. So these were the judges, and they if someone in a case where one strikes the wife of another, umafleleim, because you hit someone's wife and she was pregnant, we're talking about. So she miscarried the child. So how would they judge such a case? Amr lei, they would tell the person whose wife was beaten, instead of him being punishing the hitter, the one who struck, or to be paid for his loss, they would say Yahava nihale de niabra nihalich. So what would they say to him? Give your wife to this person so he could impregnate her. He could give you back what you're missing, right? So that's a twisted. That's what he comes as this guy. This person struck my wife, and because he struck my wife, she miscarried, right? So there's many ways to judge the case. One would be to punish the person, right? Obviously. Second way would be also to pay compensation. I lost a child. So he says, no, fine, we figured it out. Let him impregnate her, and he's going to give back what he took. She's pregnant again. She's pregnant with someone else's child. That's not my problem. The pasuk leudne the chamre the chavre. If it says if in a case where one savored the ear of another donkey, right? They cut off the ears of your friend's donkey. So the judge would say, so he would say, give the donkey to the one who caused the damage until the ear grows back, right? That's not going to happen. But he's saying he has to give back to you, so wait till it grows back. And if someone threw a stone at you and wounded you, right? Let's say, and caused you to bleed, so you say pay him, because one of the ways of healing was to they would bleed people a little bit. So when you bled out a bit, that would be a way of like giving blood, like a way of kind of circulating, getting rid of the bad blood. So the guy says he or she hit me. I was bleeding. Okay, so pay him for the services he did. You would have to go to the doctor. You'd pay a lot of money to have a doctor bleed you out. So pay this person. Again, what do we see? It's all camouflaged in reasoning. They can manipulate the narrative as much as they want, but at the end of the day is God doesn't buy this, and God flips them over. He's not interested in them being part of society. Zaifu matzli dine. Yahavna nihila v'yishkev ma'achati muberes. Rashi says, if someone struck someone's wife, and caused her to miscarry, he says, give her to him to sleep with her, and then he will impregnate her and give back a wife that has a child. Give him the donkey until the donkey's ears grow back. If someone caused you to bleed, a wound, so then you'd pay them for the service of bleeding out. So there's some sort of service here. I think this is all self-understood of what's going on over here. He says, I think the Ad Ramah says that the initial judgment of the case of the wife, that they would give the wife to the judges. Okay. That makes more sense. Okay, he says like this: the Aver b'Mabara Yoiv Arbezuza, one who crossed the river. Now that's the Jordan River, which makes more sense, not the ferry, but on a ferry. So one who crossed the river on a ferry would give 4 zuz. Before we said paid 1 zuz. The Aver b'Ma Yoiv Tamne Zuzim, one who crossed the river by water gave 8 zuz, so paid double. Again, it's either 1 or 2 or 4 or 8. The difference is, people say, what do you mean before it was 1, now it's 4. They say, first of all, it shows inflation. Number 2 is that it started off as 1 and 2, and it rose quickly from 4 to 8. Zimnacha, the one time, Asahu Koivis, a launderer came. Ikla lahasam. He came to Sodom. Amrle have arba zuzah. Pay for the ferry for zuz. Amrlahu ana b'mayavri. I didn't take the ferry. I walked through the river. Amrle, so they said to him, Imkain have a tamu. Then you have to pay 8 zuz. The varta b'may, because he went through the water. La yahiv. He wouldn't give it. The payment. And padyuhu, so they wounded him, they beat him. Also, the comment did Dayan, so he went to court. Again, everything was, they had police. It wasn't like it was chaos. They had rules. So they wanted him to pay 8. He said no, so they beat him. So he went to the courts to exercise his rights. Amrlei, so he said to the launderer, Havle agra de shakalach dama. You have to pay him for bleeding you, because they did a service to you. Utamni zuz devartiv maya. You still have to pay the additional 8 zuz for going through the water and not taking the ferry. The over b'maya, over b'ragl b'maya. Rashi says over here, so that's what Rebbe Din says, that in the inconsistencies of 1 zuz verse and 2 zuz, or 4 zuz and 8 zuz, one explanation is there was a local ferry fee. Like a lot of places have the local fee is one price. The local fee is one price, and if you're a resident of a city, you pay one price. I was just in the beach, right? So if you're a citizen, you pay one price for the whatever the services of the city is, and if you're a foreigner, you have to pay more money. So it could be the 1 2 zuz was for a local person, and the 4 8 zuz was if you were a guest. This here is talking about a guest. The launderer was a guest. Some explain the people of Sodom rationalize this policy by saying that since one who walks through the river removes water from the river, like I said before, he must pay double. Another opinion is that they said he is penalized for attempting tax evasion. One of the ways the city makes money, although we said before they don't need money, but again, all these inconsistencies are not to be confused with the facts. So they had a tax evasion. If you don't pay the city ferry, so you were penalized. Alternatively, they said the policy was instituted for the benefit of the people, so they would not endanger themselves. Another opinion says is that they try to show themselves as righteous people. It was a penalty. We didn't want people to walk through the river. It's dangerous, right? So don't walk through the river. We created a safe passage through the ferry. If you want to go through the unsafe passage, we're going to penalize you for endangering yourself. Again, God didn't subscribe to all these things. Anyone who endangered himself was fined. Okay, now we have in 1 more minute. I thought we would finish further, but we didn't get further. So it says over here, now we learned last week about Eliezer. Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, was a person he wasn't just a servant, he was a respectable person. So last week we learned about his dialogue he had with Shem, the son of Noah, who told him about how the behavior was on the ark. And now we have stories that Eliezer also dealt with the people of Sodom. He himself was a victim of the behavior of Sodom. So it says, Eliezer Eved Avram, Eliezer the servant of Avram, Isrami Hasim, he once ended up in Sodom. Padyuhu, so they wounded him, right? They weren't nice to people. Also the Kamei, so he went to the courts to exercise his rights. He went to the judge. Amalei havlei agr the shaklei dam. They told him the rule, right? The Constitution says if someone punches you and bleeds you, you have to pay him for the service of bleeding you. Shakal glala, so he took a stone, and padyu iul dayani threw the stone at the judge. Amalei mai, the judge says, "What are you doing? Why are you throwing a stone at me?" So Amalei, Eliezer said to the servant of Avram said to the judge, Agra denafik minach hav nehali lahai. You owe me now, just like because I made you bleed. So you owe me an amount of money. So the money you owe me, pay it to the person that I owe money to. And my money will remain with me. Meaning to say, he showed that this is all, the judge was ready to pass judgment on Eliezer. It wasn't ready to be, being punched in the nose himself. Rashi says, Glolas and stone. The judge said to Eliezer, "What are you doing? Why do you throw a stone at me?" Eliezer said, "Agra the mechayvli the shakli lachdama." because you owe me money because I took blood from you. Havle lahu gavri, you should pay the person, the shakali dam, who took my blood. V'zuzi didi kedekaimi kaimi, and my money will remain with me. V'lule kedekai kai kach amalei dain mi yitein shayisi kebetchila. Levai kedekai kai. So another way is that I hope just the way things were, that the money stays with everyone. But what we see from here that they were trying to manipulate things. He was manipulating their behavior in these things. Okay, this continues. We have to continue next week, and finish off the next few stories. How Eliezer dealt with, the evils of Sodom. And finally, we finish off with the famous story that's brought down in Rashi. And what was the final, so to say, the needle that broke the camel's back was when it says over there, one of Lot's daughters who gave food to a poor person, and they applied honey to her body and had her stung to death. That's when God says He's no longer going to subscribe to this whole corrupt situation, and the people of Sodom don't deserve to be part of society. And as the Talmud tells us, not only don't they deserve to live in the world, they're not going to have a portion in the world to come. God says that way of living, that way of behavior is not, there's no rectifying that. That's done. And I think it's a strong lesson to ourselves about, there's right and wrong, and then there's right and wrong. All right, everyone, Laila Tov, everyone, take care. Thank you for joining. And Mr. Shem will just finish off next week. Continue with the Gemara of other peoples that, unfortunately, I don't have a portion in the world to come.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Welcome.